G'day viewers, I've got David Pearce here, and we're just about to talk about the Google Calico Aging Research Initiative, which I've been talking to a lot of transhumanist voices about this particular phenomenon in the media recently, but everybody's been sort of most transhumanists have sort of picked up on this and had an opinion, so I thought I might ask David what his is. What do you think about Google being, a big and well-funded company with 55 billion, I think, something ridiculous, at their fingertips? This new anti-aging sort of phenomenon they're picking up on. Well, I don't know if they class it as anti-aging, but anyway, yeah. What are your thoughts?
My first thoughts were absolutely fabulous news. There's doesn't seem to be any immutable law of nature that dictates that organic robots must grow old and die, at least if we ignore something like the heat death of the universe or anything exotic like that. And so it is good that at last some serious funding is going to be invested. The details of the project are, of course, still extremely sketchy, shall we say. I think what's really needed, though, is a multi-pronged approach, in that there is something almost cruel telling the older generation, let's say anyone over the age of 50, that science is quite likely to find a cure for aging 10 years after you're dead, or something like that. So I think what is really needed is a combination of cryonics, or rather a change in the regulatory framework that makes something like cryonics, the idea that at your nominal death you are frozen or suspended with the possibility at a later date of being reanimated, together with these initiatives into anti-aging, radical anti-aging therapies that may benefit the younger generation. Precisely what the cut-off point is, whether it's 40 or 50 or 60, above which anyone alive today has no realistic hope of an indefinite lifespan, I don't know. But I think in principle, at any rate, it's possible to offer hope to literally everyone who essentially doesn't want to grow old and die. But as I said, I think we need a change in the regulatory framework. For instance, at the moment, in the case of cryonics, you can only be suspended after your death. In many cases, the suspension process takes place hours after the nominal death, when irretrievable information loss has occurred. So, yes, in a nutshell, fabulous news. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear you. Now, for people who won't be able to have access to these technologies, maybe because they're just too old, or the other possibility is they may not have money enough. But so how do we sort of get the message out there so that the right people are interested, and the others don't get alarmed that they're going to be the last to die or whatnot, right?
I think the fancy term is adaptive preference formation, or sour grapes, in that if you don't think you're going to benefit from radical anti-aging technologies, it's psychologically a very useful form of rationalization if you can at least partially convince yourself that you wouldn't want to live forever or to enjoy an indefinite lifespan. In practice, as soon as I think these technologies are available, there isn't any serious question they would be well-nigh universally used. One only needs to see the response of some new anti-wrinkle cream or something like that being announced. Essentially, it's swept from the shelves in the stores. There is a tremendous pent-up demand. I think more people are probably going to be skeptical of cryonics. I'm much less skeptical so long as the suspension process is actually done within minutes of one's nominal death. What would be ideal is if the regulatory framework could be changed that could allow people to be suspended, let's say a day or so before their anticipated death, so that everything could be done in beautifully controlled conditions. But this would require legislative change. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Maybe it could happen on like a seasteading sort of vessel out at sea, but then there are other risks involved. But
Yeah.
But anyway, I mean, like it's interesting the logic of denial, that the ghastly effects of aging, and a sort of psychological buffer to this existential angst that we might feel if there were no alternative, other than or actually no alternative to death. There was no suspension, there was no rejuvenation therapy. You'd suggest that denialism is a legitimate and even preferable way of approaching this.
Yes, it's almost the same as say kind of suffering and depression. As long as it's inevitable, and biology makes it pretty much inevitable for most people today, it's extremely useful to be able to rationalize it. But as soon as that technology becomes either available or imminently available, that rationalization serves as an obstacle to change. The really challenging and difficult period comes where it's tantalizingly within reach, whether aging or phasing out the biology of suffering and depression, and yet at the same time people are still stuck with it right now, and it's managing this transitional period.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I mean, I'm conflicted between, I guess, the comforts of denialism, but also, the possible rewards and payoffs, but also my curiosity to look at the truth, the painful truth, but as much truth as possible, given the choice. I mean, it does come down to the individual preferences, but would you suggest that somebody would be better off approaching the painful truth as starkly as possible, or just taking the feel-good option?
Most progress in history has come from people who did have an unreasonable optimism. I think of myself as a depressive realist, but the problem is I've been a depressive realist about the wheel. If everyone thought like me, we'd still be living in caves. But yeah, we have this number of rationalizations for why aging is good. One hears that essentially that it would be boring having an indefinite lifespan, whereas, to be honest, the challenges of eradicating the biology of boredom are trivial compared to those of phasing out the biology of aging. Essentially, I think we can assume that if we can phase out aging, we can phase out boredom too. And in practice, yes, not merely will our successors, and in the case of younger people at least alive today, quite possibly they themselves, essentially, that they will an exhilarating indefinite lifespan, not a boring indefinite lifespan. There genuinely are dilemmas. I can touch on one or two of them. One obvious dilemma is what of despots who can live indefinitely. At the moment, one can have horrendously dictatorial regimes, but the leader grows old and eventually dies. Is there a possibility of some kind of ossified totalitarianism? Even in the liberal democracies, there are going to be horrendous dilemmas in the sense that if there is no aging or no involuntary aging, essentially there will be a population explosion unless people agree to regulate in a very tightly disciplined way reproduction. In practice, many people want both to have children and to enjoy indefinite lifespans. Not merely that, they will almost certainly want to ensure that their much-loved pet dog or cat enjoys indefinite lifespan too. So the legislative regulatory framework will have to be adapted too. But all these are problems with solutions. Right now, perhaps though, the most obvious challenge is that we do not yet have a clearly defined technical roadmap how to eliminate the biology of aging. This is on a much more pessimistic note. It doesn't seem as though absolute maximum lifespan is increasing. We're seeing this rectangularization of the morbidity and mortality curve. We need to a true breakthrough. On the other hand, we do have tantalizing glimpses, something so-called Syndrome X, like this girl who essentially does not appear to age in America, and though she has the mind brain of perhaps a 9-month or 1-year-old, her body as she ages, essentially she does not appear to be aging. And imagine if it were possible to freeze our bodily development, not at the age of let's say a small child, and she looks like a little toddler even though she's 20 years old, but imagine if it were possible to do that around, let's say, late teens or early 20s. So back to your original question again. Yes, fabulous news, but the transitional era is still going to be ugly, messy and complicated. But my own priority now, if I were campaigning, would be actually on the legislative front to make cryonics, for instance, opt-in rather than opt-out, and to allow, with very, very careful safeguards, as I said, the possibility, or the opportunity rather, to be suspended before one's actual nominal death. Because if you allow deterioration to set in, and immediately before people die, often there is profound intellectual and physical deterioration, then yes, it makes it much, much harder to be reanimated.
Right, yeah, that's interesting. Well, how would you then approach, I guess, influencing legislature? I mean, do you think it would be, if you had some form of existence proof in, like, the natural world, or, in animal experiments, or something else, or would you be purely going by, like, just philosophizing about it, saying, well, this is logically should be possible in the future. Here's why. Therefore, we should do all we can to preserve as much information in the brain just before death. How would you go about it?
I suppose I would focus on lobbying. It's not as though there is a large anti-cryonics lobby. I think the worst that could really be said about it is that it's a waste of time, or it's futile, or something like that.
People say it's a waste of resources.
Yes, however, I think it would need to be shown that irretrievable information loss occurs in the suspension process, and all the indications are that the damage occurs when attempts are made to reanimate an organism that has been suspended. But yes, lobbying the political parties, getting it as a manifesto commitment. Once again, as long as the worst that is said is that it's a waste of resources, I don't think too many people or organisations are going to campaign against it. And to be cynical, politicians want votes. If there is a significant minority of people who want to pursue this, and very few people are actively opposed. After all, it's not as though anyone is going to be obliged to take this route. It's simply facilitating it for those who want to maximise their opportunities. At the moment, I think most people outside perhaps the US who haven't got access to Alcor facilities, essentially they are just extremely sceptical that essentially they could ever be revived.
Yeah. There are some facilities in Australia. I don't know how advanced they are, but yeah, they're not alcohol. That's for certain. So back to the aging phenomenon. So look, I haven't really gone doing public polls down the street of every, the layperson who may have actually heard of this. But what do you think are the main like public responses to Google doing this long-term aging research, and would that differ if they thought it was some other smaller company like Sens?
Yes, I suspect so. In that, yeah, money talks. It's a very clear sign of credibility. Hats off to Aubrey de Grey and Sens what they've achieved. Though I've read Anti-Aging, and as I was extremely impressed by Anti-Aging, perhaps Aubrey's greatest achievement, I think, is turning radical anti-aging research into something that is mainstream. Extraordinary achievement. It's a great mistake generally to personalise these, the different transhumanist themes, but Aubrey does deserve acknowledgement for this against extraordinary odds too. The amount of ridicule he must have received in the early days. Yes, you must need to acquire quite a thick skin to cope with that kind of thing. But I would certainly recommend anyone actually reading Anti-Aging. My response reading it was, yes, this is going to happen, but I think Aubrey's slightly too optimistic on timescales here. But once again, factor in my depressive realism.
Yeah, what was the name of the book? I didn't think it was called Anti-Aging. I think it was
Ending Aging.
Ending Aging.
Yeah,
That's it. Ending Aging.
Oh.
Yes, that's right. Now, yes, so he's got the seven deadly things that he thinks the major reasons for aging, and his approach isn't like trying to change the pathways that cause aging. It's not trying to fix it once the aging has begun, but it's the damage accumulation that causes the aging in between these two, which he believes needs to be fixed. And so rejuvenation equaling sort of the cleansing process is probably the quickest route to achieving like meaningful forms of achieving health span. So yeah, but it may be in the future that like we will be able to achieve like breakthroughs in reducing the actual metabolic pathways impact at the beginning of the cycle, and actually returning people from morbidity at the end of the aging cycle as well. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I think in the long run, and I stress the long run, the idea should be to have a genetically pre-programmed super longevity, but that isn't feasible at the moment.
People who are alive, right?
Yeah, essentially, if one is going to have children, I think one has an obligation in the long run not to create more suffering and not to create aging. But the era of true designer genomes as distinct from pre-implantation genetic diagnosis is still probably decades away. But I think one has an obligation not merely to people who are alive today, but to those one is bringing into well-being to maximize their opportunities and quality of life and minimize their suffering. There is no denying that.
Well, there's a couple of...
Sorry, someone's tried to ring me, so I'm going to have to... Hello? Hello, are you back again?
Yep.
Okay, sorry about that.
Yeah. Yes, that's fine. Yeah, well, there's a couple of different forms of gene therapy, isn't there? One of them is like the germline gene therapy, and the other is somatic gene therapy. Yeah, I mean, somatic gene therapy is useful for people who are alive today, but can it achieve everything that germline could?
Eventually, yes. I think we're going to be editing our own genetic source code. Someone is... I'm going to have to... Apologies. Can you edit this out? I'm just going to have to basically tell them that I'm having an interview. Can you edit this out?
Yeah. I'll just stop and start it, okay?
Okay, all right. Let me just...